This is FSN.
Cheers, Ollie. Thanks very much. Welcome to Tuesday's Richie Allen Show. How you doing? It's a dark and a damp Manchester just after 5 p.m. Always good to have your company. Got a pretty packed out show for you today. Can't wait for it.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Welcome to the program. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts joins me live from Virginia in around about 20 minutes' time. We'll be talking about lots. We'll talk about Brexit. I'm sure we'll talk about Donald Trump, immigration, and more. Besides, Paul's the top man. Read his articles at paulcraigroberts.org. And later on in the program, Dr. Eric Karlstrom will join me live from California, and we'll talk with Eric about the California wildfires, which have claimed nearly 100 lives. Now, there's a bit of an interesting connection to today's program. I have been telling you of late that Paul Craig Roberts has been musing amongst his circle of friends and his peer group about some of the imagery coming out of California. What is really causing these wildfires? Could it be something other than climate change? Could it be something other than we are told through commercial and national media? Well, Eric Karlstrom, who's been on this program before talking about, well, gang stalking and mind control, he'll be joining me in the second hour to talk about why he thinks there is more to these fires than meets the eye. Don't miss that. As usual, if there's something you'd like to contribute to the program, you can tweet at Richie Allen Show. That's my Twitter handle, and I'll read those comments out as they come in. All right. Made a YouTube live stream earlier on, explained the brief absence yesterday. I'll be doing a full live show this Friday to make up for yesterday, and in the live stream I also talked a bit about the future plans for the program. I think some interesting things coming in the new year. If you want to catch that live stream, it's on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Richie Allen Show. Right, okay, let's crack on with the program then. Jacob Rees-Mogg, terminological inexactitude, darling, has likened Tory Brexiteers to Dad's Army. He's dubbed his own European research group Dad's Army over the way they have been unable to get enough letters of no confidence in Theresa May. They need 48. So far, 25 Tory MPs have publicly said they submitted their letter. Asked if there was a Dad's Army feel to all of this, Rees-Mogg replied, "I've always admired Captain Mannering." We can hear just a smidgen, mind, of what Jacob Rees-Mogg had to say this afternoon. And don't worry, we won't be spending an inordinate amount of time on Brexit. Here's Rees-Mogg. Dad's Army.
I've always admired Captain Mannering. Thank you. One of your colleagues sitting also in the front row knows that coup is entirely the wrong word. Indeed, it's a rather silly word, because what I have done and what others have done is use the democratic process within the Conservative Party to say we have no confidence in the leader of the Conservative Party. This is not an illegitimate process, it's one set out in the rules. And this type of language, this over-egged language, is rather damaging to political debate, because it tries to see things in terms that are not realistic and not true. It is just like a general election in a way. That is a legitimate means of changing leader. And using legitimate means is completely proper. And people will then make their decision. Do 47 want to come with me or not? Now, I may find that they don't. Or that they don't do it today, but they do it when we get the meaningful vote. That is a decision for them. In politics, you have to set out your stall, you have to say what you believe in, and you then see whether people agree with you or not. Fortunately, in a democracy, it is not given to insist that people follow you, and that is one of the great virtues of our system.
One of the great virtues of our system, it's not given that people have to follow you. Watching Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and one or two of these other Brexiteers running around trying to get 48 letters in reminded me of something. I thought I'd share this with you. Reminded me of this.
We messed up big time on Sunday. I had sponsors in the stands, and I'm hugging and holding hands and kissing them in the ear and praying for a good showing. And what do? We end up looking like a monkey fucking a football out there.
That's right. Mogg and Johnson and Davis and the rest of them are like a monkey fucking a football. Yeah. They haven't got the numbers yet. Mogg said they might have in a few days. We'll wait and see. It is a clusterfuck of gargantuan proportions. And you know what? Just for your sanity and my sanity, we're going to leave that story right there. Right? Okay, to more serious matters. Israel, if you happen to be Palestinian, has denounced as shameful Airbnb's decision to withdraw its listings from homes in Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. Its tourism minister said Israeli authorities would back legal challenges lodged by settlers against the American firm. Airbnb, well done by the way, said it made the decision because settlements were at the core of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Settlements are not at the core of the conflict, but fair enough, we can overlook that little faux pas. It's a lot more than that, but good move by Airbnb. It apparently affects 200 listings, and the Palestinians and the supporters of Palestine and the BDS movement are thrilled with Airbnb. According to the BBC, Jewish settlements in territory occupied by Israel in the 1967 Middle East War are considered illegal under international law. The BBC is brilliant at kind of airbrushing history in such a manner. But anyway, we'll take it today. Human Rights Watch called Airbnb's decision a positive step and asked other companies like Booking.com to follow suit. Good stuff. I say good stuff indeed. Now, Israel are playing Scotland tonight in the UEFA Nations League. I would like to see every country in the world boycotting Israel, refusing to play football or any other sport against Israel. Completely boycott and ostracise the most heinous apartheid regime on earth. That's the way to deal with them. I know you'll be punishing athletes, men and women who may not have ever done anything wrong. And some people will say that's not fair, Richie. But I say, well, it's the only way to deal with tyranny. It's as simple as that. So good on Airbnb, by the way. Let's hope Booking.com and others do the same. Interesting story in the BBC today, dear listener. I think you'll find this interesting, dear listener. Anti-vaccine community behind North Carolina chickenpox outbreak. Those bastards! Those anti-vaxxers, they're bastards! They're going to kill us all! They're going to kill us all, I tell you! A North Carolina school with a large anti-vaccine community is at the heart of the state's largest chickenpox outbreak, according to officials. Right? Last Friday, when you and I were preparing for the weekend, 36 students at Asheville Waldorf School were diagnosed with the disease. According to the Asheville Citizen Times newspaper, 36 students came down with chickenpox. The school has one of the state's highest rates of religious exemption, which allows students to skip vaccination. US health officials say vaccinating is far safer than getting chickenpox. Let's hear a statement. Shall we hear a statement? I'll read it for you. This is the biggest chickenpox outbreak state health officials are aware of since the vaccine became available. And that's a North Carolina Department of Health spokesman speaking to the BBC. It's the biggest chickenpox outbreak we have seen since the vaccine became available. Out of the Waldorf school's 150 students, 110 have not received the vaccine for chickenpox. That's very interesting, isn't it, dear listener? 152 students, 110 haven't received the vaccine. Good for them. And 67.9% of the school's kindergarten students had religious immunisation exemptions on file for the last school year. Brilliant. Nearly 70% of the kindergarten students had religious immunisation exemptions taken up. So the parents basically saying, we're not having the children immunised because of our religious beliefs. I don't care what the reason is. I think it's a good thing. You know that anyway. The primary school is cooperating with local health officials and is compliant with all North Carolina laws, a spokesperson for the school told the BBC. We find that our parents are highly motivated to choose exactly what they want for their children. We as a school do not discriminate based on a child's medical history or medical condition. That's nice from the school. Basically saying we're not going to turn away children who haven't had the jab. However, local health officials, bigging themselves up and trying to act big and bad, have said that they're closely monitoring the situation. We want to be clear, says Dr. Jennifer Mullendore. Vaccination is the best protection from chickenpox. When we see high numbers of unimmunised children and adults, we know that an illness like chickenpox can spread easily throughout the community into our playgrounds, grocery stores and sports teams. By the way, in the UK, chickenpox is an optional childhood vaccine, just in case you were wondering. My listeners overseas, chickenpox is a brilliant thing for children to get. Get your child the chickenpox today. Order it on Amazon.com. It's 99 cents for a little box that comes, and you can give the box to your child and the child will get chickenpox. That's bullshit, by the way. I just made it up. But it's a good thing for a child to develop an immune system, to be exposed to the antibodies, to the virus, to other viruses, and to illnesses like chickenpox. Expose them. Expose them all. Couple of interesting stories in the Times of London and in the Telegraph about the same thing. Now, I would have talked about this last night, but I wasn't here, dear listener. Why are Silicon Valley executives banning their children from using social media? Good question. That's in the Times, and the Telegraph is covering this as well. Why the Silicon Valley titans who got our kids addicted to screens are sending their own children to tech-free Waldorf schools. Two headlines. Why the Silicon Valley titans who got our own kids addicted to screens are sending their children to tech-free schools. And the other headline, why are Silicon Valley execs banning their kids from using social media? Apparently the tech elite in America are paying up to $40,000 a year to send their children to schools that enforce a back-to-basics approach. Why do you think? Right. They manufacture the devices. They develop the software. They know what it is doing to our children. Not that I have any children. Please God, someday. They know what it does. So they are reticent, to say the least, to expose their own children to it. Two excellent articles in the Times of London and in the Telegraph. Brilliant stuff. I mean, think of it, right? The people behind Facebook and Google and everything else, but also the people behind the software that goes on the phones and the tablets and the laptops, are doing all they can to limit their own children's exposure to it. What do you think is going on there then? Well, yeah. And the Telegraph article was very good because it actually quotes people who work for firms like Cloudflare and, some of the people who have developed the PowerPoint software and people who have developed programs for Android and stuff like that. And they're all saying that they just don't allow their children use it. And I'm going to quote Pierre Pierre Laurent, or Perry Laurent. Let's call him Pierre Laurent. He's a former marketer at Microsoft, and he's a father of 3. And he said when his own son was not using the tech, and when he was playing on his own without any technology, he saw the results of it. The child was more creative, was more responsive, was more talkative, was more aware, and was more engaged with other people. You think? Yeah. Honestly. Amazing stuff, yeah? Silicon Valley people, executives and software developers not allowing their own children use the stuff that they are getting your child addicted to. 18 and a half minutes past the hour. Came across an interesting story on RT about a journalism school in Leeds banning capital letters in emails and in other literature, forms of literature, because the students might be triggered by the capital letters. You think I'm joking? Here's Anastasia Churkina from RT.
A journalism department at a university in Leeds has been considering avoiding using capital letters when giving assignments to students. The reason? It might make the students a bit too frightened or upset.
The memo says any lack of clarity can generate anxiety and even discourage students from attempting the assessment at all. Generally, avoid using capital letters for emphasis and the overuse of do, and especially don't.
It also reportedly suggested warm and helpful tones and avoiding negative instructions. The university told us it was guidance from a course leader to academic staff and said it was proud of the personal and inclusive experience it offers on campus. However, some staff members have dubbed this nonsense, saying students are being treated like kids.
Indeed. But I mean, that's nothing when you think that 3 years ago we were talking on this programme how students studying criminology could exempt themselves from lectures where pictures of violent crime scenes might be shown, lest they become triggered. There won't be much use then in years to come when they have to go out to a crime scene themselves, I suppose. So this is mild by comparison. Right. Yeah. Here's an interesting one on the theme of people being triggered. Marks and Spencer's Knickers display branded vomit-inducing. What's this all about? Marks and Spencer Knickers display branded vomit-inducing. Feminists have described a Marks and Spencer window display that suggests women must have fancy little knickers as sexist and vomit-inducing. This is a display at the Nottingham store for Marks and Spencer, and it has been juxtaposed with one which suggests men must have outfits to impress. A campaigner altered the window so that it read full human rights instead of knickers. Campaigners love defacing things that trigger them. Marks and Spencer said the displays were part of a wider campaign that featured a variety of must-haves. What it is, it's a department store, Marks and Spencer. They've got mannequins in the window wearing racy knickers. And the sign says, must have fancy little knickers. Women must have them. Right? Feminists don't like it. Fran Bailey asked, OK, M&S, have we really not learned anything in the last 35 years? Or am I alone in finding this, their major window display, completely vomit-inducing? Speaking to the BBC, Ms. Bailey, he, she, them, their, it, or whatever they call themselves, said the display had incensed her for 2 reasons and it put her off from shopping at M&S. I think M&S using the slogan must have is very distasteful when true necessities are lacking for many working and non-working people. The true necessities being warmth, shelter and food, said Ms. Bailey. They never miss a chance to virtue signal, of course. The perennially offended. People who are offended constantly morning, noon and night never miss a chance to virtue signal, to lend some weight to their argument. You know? Yeah. As if it's about homeless people. Piss off. 22 minutes past the hour. Paul Craig Roberts joins the programme in a couple of minutes' time. Live from Virginia. This is the Richie Allen Show, by the way. How you doing? Live on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, richieallen.co.uk and triggerwarning.tv for Tuesday, November the 20th. Eagles on the Richie Allen Show for 25 minutes past the hour. You must say Eagles. It's not the Eagles, apparently. It's Eagles, right? Get it right. They're on tour, Eagles, and will be in the UK next year, apparently. Right, to matters more serious than Eagles and music in general. Let's welcome back to the programme a terrific man, regular guest on this show, an author, academic. You know all about him. I don't have to tell you. About him. He's a former, of course, US Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Read him daily at paulcraigroberts.org. His articles are insightful, incredibly well briefed, and always challenging and thought-provoking. He's been writing recently about Julian Assange, about identity politics, and about Brexit, which is of huge interest to us. Let's welcome back to the programme our friend Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Paul, how are you?
Just fine, Richie. Thank you.
Thanks for coming back on. We love having you on. It's great to be with you as always. Thanksgiving week as well. Are you a football fan, Paul?
Not really. I sometimes like to watch soccer matches.
But not so much American football. There's a lot of buzz amongst football fans. Apparently, there was 100 points scored in a game last night.
Really?
Yeah, apparently, yeah, it was crazy. Monday Night Football. Anyway, to matters more important than sport. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Paul, who heads up the European Research Group, which is a bunch of Conservative members of Parliament who support properly leaving the European Union. He's in a bit of a quandary, it seems, today. He started a chain whereby he sent a letter to the 1922 group, and he hoped that 48 other MPs would send a similar letter that would trigger then a vote of no confidence in UK Prime Minister Theresa May, who's certainly not seeking to deliver Brexit. They don't have the 48 names yet. May is persevering with a plan that she will never get through Parliament because the Labour Party, the opposition party, won't support it. Many of her own MPs won't support it. Neither will the Liberal Democrats or the Scottish Nationalists. What a mess, Paul. Let's get the perspective of somebody who's not mired in it. No better man than you. What do you make of this situation?
Well, you know, you and I never thought Brexit would go through.
No.
And it looks like what the Prime Minister May has done is to sabotage a real exit and put in its place a pretend exit in which, as I understand what I read about it, you exit in name only, but you're not really out. You're still subject to the laws. You have to keep paying the money. And so it's a hoax. And I don't understand why the vote of no confidence hasn't already taken place. It's such an obvious hoax. May has betrayed the people, betrayed the vote, made a fool of herself and the Tory party. And you would think that they would want her out. But I think it's increasingly a situation where people just don't get embarrassed anymore. No matter how bad or unethical or inappropriate their behavior, it doesn't embarrass them anymore. And so she seems to be persevering in trying to perpetrate this hoax. I assume the United States is behind it, that she's been well paid off and or well threatened, and that she's doing Washington's bidding here. Washington doesn't want the EU to break up, and it's afraid if the British leave it, others will too. And of course, some countries are really suffering under it, like Greece was ruined under it, and unless this new Italian coalition can fend it off, the same thing's going to happen to Italy that happened to Greece. So, and of course, Hungary doesn't agree with it, but seems trapped in the EU. So Washington, I think, is behind this and is trying to prevent an exit that could unravel the whole stupid thing. The whole EU, the whole thing is stupid. The whole idea is to get rid of European countries and amalgamate everybody into some sort of a common state. Well, that's just against history. It's against tradition. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have a country with so many different languages.
People won't stand for it. I can answer, well, I can't answer. I can give a clue as to why May is persevering. A strange phenomenon has kind of grown up in the UK media in the last 3 days. It seems that right across print media and broadcast media, they've tried to rebrand May as a decent and honest woman who's struggling, who's been left with a mess that she didn't create. And the BBC have been asking its listeners constantly on its phone-in shows, you know, do you like her? Do you, even if you disagree with her, do you think she's honourable? Do you think she's decent? And they're trying to create this narrative that May is fundamentally good and kind and that it's not really her fault and she's trying to make the best of a bad lot. And I think it's kind of working, Paul, to be honest. I think people are falling for it. They're coming around to thinking that, you know, that it's really not her fault, that she's just a good and decent human being left with a mess.
Well, it's what you see, what you've described is what the media is doing is it's turning a betrayal and deception into a positive trait. And so, she's a decent human being, even though she's betrayed us and deceived us.
Yeah.
So I don't know why anybody puts up with the media or the BBC. I mean, these people are disgusting, you know. They have no integrity. And it's what I was saying, that they're erasing the concept of shame. You know, if something like this, say it happened when? The 30s, the 40s, the 50s, maybe even the 60s. The shame associated with it would have prevented May from doing it.
The media would have driven her out, Paul.
Today, there's no shame. So she can get up, betray the people's vote, deceive them and everyone else, and BBC convinces everybody she's just an honourable, good, decent person.
And it's working. On the European Union and why you've spoken very strongly against it over the years and why it's not necessary and why it ultimately kills sovereignty. Is it part of a plan? I mean, I often talk about this with other guests. Is it a plan to ultimately centralise control, Paul? Is it a stepping stone to a world with maybe a single authority? Is that why the European Union is what it is? It was always meant to be one of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 federalist kind of super states, which would eventually become one.
As well as I know about it, it was the creation of the CIA. The whole idea was a CIA idea to use a common market as a vehicle to produce a European Union in which the individual sovereign states would disappear. And the CIA wanted this because it's easier to control one government than, you know, a whole bunch of separate governments. So this originated as a CIA control apparatus over Europe. And the whole trouble with the one government type of thing is it would be, if there is ever a one government, it'll be under Washington. Washington will be the one government because that's the way it's had Europe since World War II. But the rise of Russia and China kind of make that not feasible to have the whole world under American hegemony because there's no evidence that Russia and China are going to accept American hegemony. And there's no other group outside of Washington that has any possibility, has no military, no power to establish some kind of a world government. It could only be established by Washington, or if Washington fails and goes away, by one of the other two big powers. But they don't have that inclination. So I think that the way to understand the EU is it was a CIA operation to put the government of Europe into one set of hands that the CIA could more easily oversee and take control of, than to have to deal with all the contending different nationalities. So that's the origin of it. They never sold it as a European Union. They sold it as a common market with no tariffs, so that goods could move back and forth. And so when people went into Europe, they didn't have to stop at each border and go through all the customs, and that's the way it was sold. But then gradually things were added, and it became an EU. And of course, if you have the EU, you don't have individual sovereignty. We saw that with Greece. And we're seeing now that with the UK. The UK can't get out. And so even on the fake exit that May is arranging, you're still in it.
Worse actually, Paul. The deal May is hoping to secure or get past is a situation. It leaves kind of the UK in permanent vassalage to the European Union without having any say. Well, European Union countries don't really have any say anyway, but it's kind of half in, half out, but worse, in fact, than actually being a full member or leaving. Just a final question on the European Union. As an economist, explain, if you can, as simply as you can, for our listeners, you're an economic expert, Paul. Why is it better for countries to be outside of these economic unions, making their own deals in their own self-interest? Why is it so important?
Well, it's important for political reasons, for the sovereignty. If you're in the EU, you're not a sovereign people. You're subject to unelected bureaucrats who, the whole notion of self-rule disappears. And so that's far more important than the economic aspects. The economic aspects are subsidiary. Would you give up sovereignty and self-rule to have a better economy? I mean, it doesn't make sense in terms of British history. So I would keep the focus on sovereignty, on self-rule, on the fact that people, the British law is basically common law, goes back to Alfred the Great in the 9th century. And the whole notion of accountable government, that the government is subject to law, that the king is subject to law, this is all a British invention. So why would they want to give away, 1,000 years of their history and put themselves under somebody else's thumb, even if they were going to have a better economy?
Yeah,
it's not logical. It's not. I mean, you want to be ruled by people that you can't hold accountable, but who can hold you accountable? That's tyranny.
It's tyranny.
That's tyranny. Yeah. Basically, the EU is a dictatorial system of tyranny. It exterminates, extinguishes sovereign national entities.
I've taken, on that, I've gone to great lengths to try and explain to my listeners how the European Council works, the Council of Ministers, the unelected nature of it. People look at the European Union and they think, well, across Europe, we elect over 750 members of the European Parliament. But what most people don't know, and the media is to blame for this, is that those 750 members of the European Parliament don't have the right to propose laws or propose legislation. They're basically just window dressing there. All the legislation and the rules come from the European Council. And these are unelected people. And of course, all these civil, we call them civil servants, bureaucrats, as you mentioned. It is completely tyrannical. But the vast majority of people, again, due to the failure of the press, the absolute capitulation of the press in recent years, they just don't understand this. Let me remind our listeners, Paul Craig Roberts is our guest this hour. We've got Paul to the top of the hour with his permission. PaulCraigRoberts.org, folks. You know all about Paul, but there are links there to his books and to his articles, which are excellent, brilliantly researched, and, as I said, always thought-provoking, challenging articles on there as well. Paul, you've been writing about Julian Assange, and I have to say, I've not been speaking a lot of late about Assange and his predicament, and it is a pretty horrible predicament. He's banged up, as they say here in the UK, in the Ecuadorian embassy, and he's been there now for years. His supporters believe that claims made against him in his native country, in Australia, but also in Sweden, claims that he has committed sexual assault, that these are trumped up and fake or false claims that are basically all about bringing Assange to the United States of America through extradition. You've been writing about him today. It's hard to believe, Paul, how long he's been in that embassy in London, isn't it? It's been such a long time now.
I think it's 6 years.
Yeah.
Plus, I think he was under house arrest in Britain for a couple of years. Or I think this ordeal is about 8 years old. There was never any rape charge brought against him. Neither of the two women who seduced him and took him home to their beds in their house ever said he raped them. One of them was concerned that he didn't use a condom, and she got scared about HIV and AIDS and wanted him to go take a test just to reassure her that she might not have caught anything. And that's where he made the mistake, because he got offended by the request and refused. And the woman, who was, you may remember all the scare about AIDS and HIV, she went to the police to ask if he could be required to take the test. That's all she asked. And the police turned it into a rape investigation. And then it went to the Swedish prosecutor, and they looked at the case and dismissed it. It was dismissed. And so he left Sweden, cleared, and went to England. But somehow, somebody, either radical feminist, most likely Washington, got a female prosecutor in Sweden to somehow reopen a closed case. I'm not sure how that happened. And then this prosecutor did something that was highly unusual. She requested extradition from England for questioning. You cannot extradite somebody from questioning. You can only extradite them when they're under charge. They've been charged with a crime. Well, the British knew that, but they were getting pressure from the Americans. And so we corrupted your courts, and that idiot judge or panel of judges ruled that, somehow maybe it's possible to extradite somebody for questioning, even though it's never before happened. So that meant he was placed under house arrest. And when the Swedish prosecutor kept refusing the offer to come interview him in England, he realized that, he was dead meat. And that's when the Ecuadorian president gave him asylum, and he somehow escaped the house arrest and got into the embassy. But then, acting on Washington's instructions, the British government refused to acknowledge his asylum, which is precisely what the Soviet Union did in the 1950s when Cardinal Mindszenty was given American asylum, and the Soviets wouldn't recognize it, and he had to live out his life in the American embassy in Budapest. So we now have the UK government, the great democracy, blah, blah, behaving precisely, exactly, every I dotted, every T crossed, like the Soviet Union in the 1950s and 60s. So this is an outrage, and yet people are silent about it. The law schools, the bar associations, of course, the media never says anything. It's an astonishing thing. Well, it proved to be such an embarrassment to Sweden that the prosecutor who had reopened the case closed it and dismissed it again. So there's no outstanding charges. So what the British have done is they're pretending, oh, we have to have him because he jumped bail. Well, he didn't need bail. He shouldn't have had bail because there was no charge against him.
That's right.
And so what you can see is that the British are the vassals, the puppets of Washington. They've held him long enough from, being able to leave the embassy without being arrested for the president of Ecuador, who gave him asylum, to no longer be in office. And now Washington has its man in office in Venezuela, who has already tried to renege on the asylum, but the embarrassment forced him off it. Washington, it now turns out, has prepared a secret indictment. Nobody knows what's in it, but we found out that they had a secret indictment because they made a cut and paste error, and it came out that they have a secret indictment. Well, the reason it's secret is because Washington has all its shills, like the people writing in The Guardian who say, oh, he doesn't face any arrest. He can walk out of the embassy at any time. He's just there trying to make a statement.
You don't
That's
believe?
What The Guardian wrote.
Wow.
They wrote that in The Guardian the other day. Well, we have the secret indictment. We know. And so what's happening is they're working it such that eventually he gets handed over to the Americans. And what are they going to do to him? Well, huge numbers of Democratic and Republican congressmen have said he should be executed. The Trump people are claiming they're going to try him for espionage. Well, how can you try journalists for espionage?
Yeah.
He hasn't spied on anybody. He hasn't stolen any documents. He simply did what all newspapers do, like the New York Times. When Daniel Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times, they published it. People have leaked information to WikiLeaks. They've published it after they go through it very carefully to be sure it's correct and it's not made up and that nobody's names are revealed in a hurtful way. And so it's a real responsible journalistic operation, probably the only one left in the entirety of the Western world.
And Paul, you think that the Guardian editors know about the absolute intention of the United States to get Assange, but they're deliberately misreporting that? In other words, as you said, right?
Yeah. Well, how could they not know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's impossible not to know. I mean, of course, the whole thing from day one is, once the United States government saw they had a chance to snare Assange. I mean, that the woman who went to the police, she had no idea what she was putting in motion. She had no idea. I'm sure she would never have gone there had she known anything like this was going to happen.
Just to ask the police, yeah.
She just wanted a reassurance she didn't get a sexually transmitted disease. That's all she wanted. And she had no idea that there's consequences.
And
I don't think Assange had any idea. Refused to take the test to see if he had a sexually transmissible disease. I don't think he knew. Nobody knew that this is what Washington would bring it to.
And Paul, do you think what's really at play here is that they want to make an example of this guy Assange? The thing to do, from their point of view, They want to get him to Washington, punish him very, very severely. I'm not sure they would execute him, but put him in prison as a way of deterring anybody else in the future that wants to leak information that might embarrass the government or the deep state. Is that what's going on?
Well, he didn't leak anything.
No.
He published
what had been leaked. Yeah. That's right. That's very important. Yeah. Very important point to it.
So what they're establishing is they are criminalizing the embarrassment of the U.S. government. So any newspaper that publishes anything, leak or not leak, that embarrasses the U.S. government is now committed a crime. That's what they're doing. They're criminalizing the embarrassment of the U.S. government because the material that was leaked to Assange that started all this came from Bradley Manning. It showed the American murder of innocent civilians walking down the street, including a man and two babies who had.
That's right.
The man had stopped to help the people dying in the street that the American gunship had just shot down. And he released documents that showed the United States had lied to and deceived all of its allies, including the UK government, that it had been brutal in its deception of the British government, the German government, the French government. And they all just stayed mum about it. They all just accepted the fact that they are vassals and not sovereign, and that Washington can do to them whatever they wanted. But it nevertheless embarrassed Washington and made relationships between the State Department and the various allies or the various vassals more difficult. The social relations were hurt. And so they got Manning. He was the one who did the leak. They put him in prison. They so screwed him up, he went through some kind of a sex change operation.
Yeah.
But they couldn't WikiLeaks until they could use the Swedish female prosecutor. And of course, that then let them use Britain. And they've used Britain now successfully for 6 years. The regime in Venezuela has changed. It's gone from one that represents the people to one that represents Washington. And so, how is Assange going to survive this? And nobody is protesting. There are no protests. There are not 100,000 people in the streets around the embassy screaming at May and the British government.
No, because because time has moved on, Paul. That's the problem. Initially, there seemed to be a lot of support for him outside the embassy. Jeremy Corbyn supporters, Labour Party leader, of course. Corbyn is, over the years, when he was a backbencher, when he was a relatively unknown politician, a strong advocate for human rights, big supporter of Palestinian rights. There is a hope that if Corbyn forms the next government in the UK, and that might be sooner rather than later, that there would be more hope for Assange. But I don't buy that, Paul. What do you think?
I don't buy it either, because once Corbyn gets to be a prime minister, if he does, then his main job is to get along with Washington. And he's going to very quickly learn that he can't go poke a finger in the eye of Washington. And so he'll be knuckled under just like anybody else. They all get knuckled under. This is why they hate Putin and they hate the Chinese, because they don't knuckle under to Washington. It's why they hate Iran, because the guy there doesn't knuckle under to them. It's why they murdered Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, because they didn't knuckle under. So Corbyn wouldn't be able to stand up in front of the pressures that Washington would put on Britain.
Well, he was given a chance to show his mettle, wasn't he, this year, with all the ridiculous allegations of anti-Semitism levelled against him and his party. Now, I've never said in my career that there are not people in public life who hate Jews and want to blame Jews for every bad thing that happens. There are people like that in the world, but they're very few and far between. And in the Labour Party, there's never been any evidence of any real endemic kind of Jew hatred or hatred for Israel. There are a lot of left-leaning politicians that have been very critical of Israel. And Corbyn had a really good opportunity, Paul, in my opinion, for what it's worth, to face down the nonsense that he was anti-Semitic or his party was. And what he did in the end was he bent the knee and he acquiesced to it and didn't stand up to it at all. And that gave me, I mean, I believed I knew that he would show his true colours in not standing up to the Zionist influence in the UK media and in the UK. Go ahead, Paul, go ahead.
Richie, it was Admiral Tom Murrah, Chief of Naval Operations, Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, who said publicly, no American president can stand up to Israel. If no American president can stand up to Israel, certainly a British Prime Minister cannot.
Yeah.
Or a person who is a leader of an opposition party. You can't. They're just too powerful. It's a weapon. They use it as a weapon. And so the possibility of him standing up is just, if anybody could stand up to Israel, would they have been permitted to destroy Palestine over a 60-year period? The Palestinian people are gone. The few that remain are in the Gaza concentration camp. All the rest of them are evicted. They're living in Jordan or Lebanon or somewhere. And all this has happened. One of the most gruesome genocides in human history, and nobody will dare criticize Israel for it.
Do you know?
And the American presidents who tried to do anything about it had no luck. Even Jimmy Carter, who was a good friend of Israel, they now claim he's an anti-Semite because he criticized the regime in Israel that has created apartheid. But it's worse than apartheid. That was his euphemism. It's actually genocide. These people have been destroyed. They've been evicted from their homes, their villages, replaced with settlers. All of this is strictly illegal under international law. The UN says it over and over and over, but nobody can enforce anything. If you want to know the honest God truth, the Israelis are above all law, their own law included.
Do you know, Paul?
So,
tragically, this week, or was it last week, you'll know better than I do, Kentucky became, I think, the 26th state in the US to outlaw the BDS movement. That's the Boycott, Divestment and Sanction movement. Incredibly. Basically, the state of Kentucky, for listeners who don't know, like 25 other states, has said that the state won't do any business with any company that is supportive of the BDS movement, which is a great movement, because the only way to hit tyrannical regimes like Israel is in the pocket. So 26 states now have effectively made it illegal to support the boycott of Israel or sanctioning Israel. It's incredible, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, if any American legislator who goes against Israel finds that he's got a well-financed opponent at his next re-election, and he loses. So, the United States gives Israel enough money every year to buy every American election. So the idiot Americans hand them over enough money that they can purchase every election in the United States. And they do.
I can't not mention...
And so we now...
Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Listen, this is just a fact. It's a fact. It's not Jew hate. It's a fact. We now have all of the top chairmen of the top committees in the Congress are now controlled by Jews. And yet they are 2% of the population, but they control all the important committees in the House and Senate.
Well, you've got a brilliant article on paulcraigroberts.org about Ivy League universities and how if you're Jewish, you're likely to get into these Ivy League universities, but if you're a white male, you're not. This is published on paulcraigroberts.org last week, I think, or about 10 days ago.
It's not my Richie.
It's Ron's. Is it Ron's?
That's
Paul?
not my article.
Sorry,
it's Ron Unz.
It's Ron. That's right. It's a guest article. I should again clarify that. Ron Unz,
Unz is Jewish. He's a Jewish intellectual, and he did all the work and research, and he came to the conclusion that a Jew has 1,000 greater percent of equal ability, has 1,000 greater percent of being admitted to an Ivy League university than a Gentile.
Yeah, that's right.
He said, I didn't do that work. It was a lot of work he put into that, and it stood up. And he showed his article has the charts, the numbers, and it shows you it's exactly the case. And he then points out that the administrations of these universities are also all Jewish. Well, it wasn't that many decades ago, the Ivy League colleges wouldn't even hire a Jewish professor. But now they control all the administrations. So, they have an agenda. They hang together and they take over. And there's no point pretending that it doesn't happen.
Because it's happening in front of our eyes. That's right. It's an excellent piece, Paul. It is by Ron Unz, and there is a link to it on paulcraigroberts.org. Paul, we're about 60 seconds away from being out of time today. I'll, of course, be asking you back on real soon. We might try and do something before Christmas if we can. Thanksgiving week. Is Thanksgiving a good time, Paul? Do you look forward to that? Will it be a special day on Thursday, family around? Will you be cooking the turkey, Mr. Roberts, yourself? Who will be cooking the turkey on Thursday? I guess it won't be you.
No, I was going to use the day of light traffic to go back to my main home. I'm still in my cabin up in the mountains. My main home's in Florida, and all of that down there was disrupted by Hurricane Michael. All the internet and the support systems. But instead, I'm going to go to have Thanksgiving lunch with my uncle and aunt and cousins, because my uncle is now very, very old, and I probably may not get to see him again.
All right.
So I'm going to be with my mother's brother and his children, my cousins, and look forward to it. I always enjoy them, and that's what I'm going to do.
Well, Paul, enjoy it. Thanks for giving us your time. I love having you on. I'm looking forward to hearing from you again, as I said, before Christmas. If it doesn't suit you, we'll speak again in January anyway. Folks, you need to go to paulcraigroberts.org if you haven't. And Paul's books, folks, and I can say this with absolute integrity because I've read Paul's books, they're terrific reads. They really are. They're as relevant today as they were when he wrote them. So check it out, paulcraigroberts.org. Well, happy Thanksgiving, Paul. Sounds like a blast. It also sounds like there's some fantastic genes in your family, by the way, with people living to great ages. Great ages. I'm not going to give your age away, but it's on your Wikipedia page anyway. Everybody knows you're approaching octogenarian territory. We'll leave it at that. But thanks for your time, my friend. I love hearing from you. Thanks for coming on.
It's always a pleasure, Richie. All the best to you.
Thanks, Paul. You too. Have a great week. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, live on the Richie Allen Show. It's paulcraigroberts.org. Check it out, the website, bookmark it. Not only Paul's articles, but as we mentioned, Paul hosts guest articles from people like Ron Unz and many other really interesting writers and thinkers as well. So check it out, Paul. CraigRoberts.org. Coming up for 5 minutes past the hour, this is the Richie Allen Show, live on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv, and of course, my own website. Now, I'll be speaking real soon. It's not very good use of the English language, Richie. In a few minutes' time, I'll be joined by Eric Karlstrom, Dr. Eric Karlstrom. And speaking of the California wildfires, as we were earlier on, and Paul, I didn't bring it up with Paul, but Paul, through his email exchanges with me and with many of his regular contributors and his peers. Paul Craig Roberts himself has been amused, not amused, I shouldn't say amused, bemused by some of the photographs of cars and homes and woodland in California. He's been very interested by this. So directed energy, weaponry, the manipulation of the climate, what part is any of that playing in the horrendous wildfires in California that have caused such a devastating loss of life? We'll talk about that with Eric Karlstrom in a minute. And if there's a question that you'd like me to put to Eric, I will do so. Just tweet it to me. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. At Richie Allen Show on Twitter. A lot of tweets came in there in the first hour. To find out what other people are tweeting to me, just go to twitter.com. Where it says search Twitter, all you got to do is put Richie Allen Show in there. That's all one word, Richie Allen Show, right? It's fairly simple. Richie Allen Show, all one word, and you'll see what other people are tweeting to me. By the way, my name is Richie Allen. How you doing? Is it the most listened to independent radio show in Europe? Your Richie Allen Show. And this is music from Blur. This is called There's No Other Way Back with Eric Karlstrom after this. Right, that was Blur, and There's No Other Way on the Richie Allen Show. Eric Karlstrom joins me in a minute.
The Richie Allen Show relies on your support. Go to richieallen.co.uk and set up a monthly donation today.
Right, it's 10 minutes past 6. It is on Tuesday, November 20th, 2018. Love hearing from Paul Craig Roberts there. paulcraigroberts.org is his website. I know I said it already, but I'll say it again. Why not? I'll say it again, I tells you. Let's welcome Eric Karlstrom back to the show then. Now, you've been following, as everybody else has been following, the devastation that has occurred in Northern California. The media has dubbed it California wildfire. And if you put California wildfire into any search engine, you'll get thousands and thousands of articles and photographs. Now, as long ago as a week, or it's at least a week anyway, 10 days ago, people were getting in touch with me to ask me to talk about the fires, which have destroyed nearly 10,000 homes, allegedly. It seems that's true, by the way. Over 1,000 people are apparently missing. This is staggering to me. And the fires have claimed at least 79 lives. Those numbers, well, the number of dead people, sadly, is expected to rise there. This is an alternative radio program. It always has been since its inception. And we like to feature researchers and academics who are asking questions about things or pointing out anomalies about things that are not being mentioned in commercial media or in national media. And my guest this hour is no stranger to you, because he's been on this program before, speaking very eloquently and with great in-depth knowledge about mind control and gang stalking and electronic torture and cults. Gang stalking, mind control, cults.com is one of his websites, but he also runs a website which is of huge interest to us today. It's 911nwo.com. That's 911nwo.com. I suggest you take a look at it when you get a chance. He is an emeritus professor of geography from California State University, and I'm delighted to welcome him back to the program today. Eric, welcome back, and thanks for taking the call. I know you're really busy. How are you?
Well, hi, Richie. It's great to have a chance to talk to you again, and I can't think of any subject which is maybe more important than this right now. And certainly my heart and prayers go out to the people of California. I lived there and taught at Cal State University in the center of California for some 22 years. So I know the area well. I know it's inundated with fires and smoke right now. I'd say crimes against humanity are ongoing there right now, and we need to try to understand them.
You know, last week, just before you were on the program today, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former US Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, and a great man, he's a great knowledgeable man, Paul, very humble man. And he's not, as long as I've known him a few years, he's not really into, he's not the sort of guy to talk about, weather manipulation or anything like that. Nothing along those lines. Geopolitical events and politics, that's Paul's area of interest. But just briefly, to let you know, Eric, Paul emails out, everything Paul emails goes out to all his circle of friends and peers. And he's been asking questions amongst his friends and peers about these fires and about the photographs, which he has said are anomalous and weird and don't make sense and don't add up to what we're being told by the media. In short, he's not convinced that the fires are naturally occurring fires. He is looking at photographs and thinks there's something different, there's something maybe a bit more sinister going on. This is why I've asked you back on. There's no better man than you to talk about what might be happening. What's happening, Eric? What's going on here?
Yeah, I taught university physical geography for 30 years, including climatology and landforms and soils and things like that. And with when I retired in 2011, I put a lot of energy into keeping my 5 websites going, as you mentioned. And, in 2011, before I retired, I did a PowerPoint presentation that I brought to the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco on man-made climate change in the skies, which looked at the history of what we call geoengineering or weather warfare, which has been, not top secret, but not well publicized either by the U.S. government as well as others since World War II. So it is our reality. Geoengineering, weather warfare is the new reality of the world. And this has been, known by the top people right along. Here's a couple quotes. Lyndon B. Johnson, president in 1962, said, "He who controls the weather will control the world. Control of space means control of the world. From space, the masters of infinity would have the power to control the Earth's weather, to cause drought and flood, to change the tides and raise the sea levels, and to divert the Gulf Stream and change temperate climates to frigid." I have many, many other quotes, Richie, from many, many well-positioned people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, former national security advisor to Carter, and then who wrote a book in 1970, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Tectonic Era. And he said in 1970, by the year 2018, technology will make available to the leaders of the major nations a variety of techniques for conducting secret warfare, of which only a bare minimum of the security forces need be appraised. One nation may attack a competitor covertly by bacteriological means, thoroughly weakening the population. Alternatively, techniques of weather modification could be employed to produce prolonged periods of drought or storm. Blah, blah, blah. Future developments may well include automated or manned space warships, deep sea installations, chemical and biological weapons, death rays, and still other forms of warfare. Even the weather may be tampered with. So again, I'll just give one more quote and then we can get into it. Noam Chomsky: governments will use whatever technology is available to them to combat their primary enemy, which is their own population.
The people.
Yes.
Yeah.
What we have is directed energy weapons, I believe, being used against the civilian population of America and other places around the world as well. And it has a lot, I think, to do with Agenda 21, United Nations Agenda 21, which the United States signed on to in 1992, along with 179 other nations. And this agenda requires that large areas of the land base should be depopulated, move the people out of rural areas, destroy the large suburban areas so that you can move the population into smart cities, stack them and pack them, human settlements. And I think what we're looking at is weather warfare, geoengineering, directed energy weapons, causing these massive fires over the last 2 years in California. And I think it is state-sponsored geoterrorism against the civilian population. I think that the evidence is overwhelming to prove that, and we can get into some of that today.
Right, this is good now, because my listeners know that I'm sympathetic to your research. Not sympathetic. It's a terrible word. We use that word all the time, sympathetic. But I'm very much interested in it. I like reading your website. I like listening to it, and I think you're on to something. So there's no point in me pretending that I'm not. So we're going to park that to one side. You know yourself as an academic man that the majority of people, when they hear this, and I've got a my show kind of has half a foot in mainstream media in terms of I get a lot of people who listen and they're listening to this type of information for the first time through my show, and they are incredulous. They just cannot believe it. They say, this is madness. Surely, who would do this to us? Who would use space weapons to clear thousands and thousands of hectares of land and burn it, render it uninhabitable, and risk killing so many human beings? Who would do that? Surely, this professor from California, he must be mad. That's what they'll be thinking, some of them. So I can't pretend that there aren't people listening who think that, even though I'm very open-minded to your research and what you've discovered. Help me explain to people why this is genuine. You talked about evidence. Talk about the types of weapons that they would use. And importantly, Eric, how can they keep this stuff secret in this day and age?
Well, what you say is very valid. Most of my friends and colleagues in California, do not suspect that this is what's going on. I have a few friends that do understand this, but it's a minority. And so most people over there who are choking on the smoke and who are running for their lives, or maybe being incinerated in their cars, or maybe they've lost everything with no hope of recovery because the insurance companies are not ensuring much of the value here. But yeah, there is an incredulity amongst the mass of the population. So your question is right on. But if you look at the documents, again, since World War II, of the patents, of the operations, it's not only these wildfires which are going on in Tennessee and California and all over the West and in many countries right now. It's also these gigantic Frankenstorms, these Category 4 and 5 hurricanes, which are also man-made now. And if you look at the past, the record of military operations, you see that Operation Storm Fury was conducted 1962 to 1983 by the U.S. Army to figure out how to manipulate, juice up, and knock down hurricanes, and that actually the first hurricane project started in 1947. So the goal of manipulating the weather for warfare purposes has been with us certainly since World War II. And in 1996, the Air Force wrote a document, Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. Now, this document is online. People can look at it. They talk about their, putting up artificial ionospheric mirrors that would allow them to bounce extremely low frequency radiation, such as produced by HAARP, to any pinpoint locality on the Earth, to create earthquakes in unstable fault areas, to build up and knock down these hurricanes as needed for whatever political agenda. So again, if you want evidence, there is so much evidence that we can't possibly get into it all. Again, I would direct people to my naturalclimatechange.org website and my 911nwo.com websites to look at this PowerPoint presentation I put together, Man-Made Climate Change in the Skies, Playing God with the Earth and the Weather, which I put together in 2011, which is basically just a primer in the patents and the laws and the operations that deal with this. I'll give you a little tidbit right now on Fox News. 10 days before the October 2017 California fires started all at once, 60 overnight, the Fox News announced that the Athena Advanced Tech High Energy Asset Fiber Optic Laser System made by Lockheed Martin was operational. And of course, the military's been doing all kinds of work on these space-based laser systems. We now have Donald Trump's Space Force, which doesn't have to do with aliens. It has to do with controlling the high ground, which is space. Whoever controls space controls the world, as Lyndon Johnson well knew. So basically, the military has weaponized all frequencies and wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum, Tesla invented his death ray back in 1942. That's what we're looking at here. We're looking at these laser death rays, which can, of course, start fires instantly. Well, I used to work in the Forest Service. I know what fires are like. The people that natural fires, that is, the people that work, the heroic firemen in California know that they call these beast fires. These are not natural fires. They're burning way too hot. They burn selectively. They knock down certain homes in a neighborhood down to the ground, just like the World Trade Center was knocked down by directed energy weapons in 2001. And they selectively leave the trees. They leave one house standing completely, and the next one is reduced to rubble. They take, many things like granite counters disappear. Cars are mangled and manipulated beyond and destroyed beyond recognition, as they were at this ground zero at 9/11. So we see so many similarities between Operation 9/11, as I call it, which was, according to Preston James of Veterans Today, in a 2014 article called "You Are the Enemy." It was conducted by the Air Force and what he calls the IZCS, the International Zionist Criminal Syndicate, in partnership. And that's 9/11. I assume that the same forces are behind these ongoing operations because they're ongoing. This is a war of, this is an ongoing war. The World War III has started. It is an environmental warfare against the civilian population. So the sooner the civilian population wakes up, the sooner they can begin to defend themselves against the powers that are being deployed. And of course, we have an $800 billion a year defense budget, quote unquote, defense budget in the United States, which gives the Pentagon, all these black budget projects they've had since the space program in the late 60s, the Star Wars in the 80s, and then the fake global warming, the fraud of global warming. A lot of this money has gone into these kinds of space war, directed energy programs, as well as the mind control, which has to do with the gang stalking. So these are all part and parcel of the same thing, to bring the smart cities of UN Agenda 21 about, to clear the land of excess people so we can give it back to the wildlife. That's the Rewilding of America Agenda 21 map of death, which was proposed at the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. And while Agenda 21 was adopted by the U.S. in 1992, this particular convention, the Biodiversity Convention, was rejected, but it's been implemented anyway because all of the major federal institutions like the Forest Service, BLM, Park Service have all signed on to Agenda 21. So they are all on board. And unfortunately, this is a eugenics program. This is a depopulation program. And so, we should be very alarmed. We don't want to be depopulated. It's not the role of governments to kill us in our estimation. And yet this is unfortunately what they have signed on to. Dr. Ronnie Kilda, the chief medical officer of Northern Finland, former chief medical officer, who wrote a book called Bright Light on Black Shadows, and who herself was murdered after 30 years of being targeted as a targeted individual. She said in her book, the elite have plans to get rid of 2/3 of the world's population with electromagnetic warfare, chemical warfare, and psychological warfare. This is what we're looking at, Richie.
Who are these people, Eric? Again, keeping in mind that these are themes that I've discussed before with you and with one or two other learned men and women, and like I said, I'm very open-minded to this because of the things I see. But the listeners, people new to this, people are confused, the bewildered. I call them the bewildered. In my mind, I think, absolutely bewildered, can't understand what's happening to the world, to their towns, to their cities, to their communities, and they stumble across programs like this. And they hear this, they want to reduce the population by 4/5 or by 2/3, as you said. Who are they? And is it compartmentalized? Are we talking about a handful of people? Because again, you would imagine human nature being human nature. If there are large numbers of people involved in this agenda, it would be leaked that they would go public with it, that they would blow the whistle on it. So who is they? What is the elite behind this?
Well, if you look at the Agenda 21 in specific as kind of the latest push as a soft takeover program for the world, this was advanced by Marie Strong, who was the top environmentalist of the United Nations for decades, and he was, good friends and with the Rothschild and the Rockefeller family and the ruling elite in America, which would include the Bushes and the others. So a lot of this is coming out of the UN, but it's also coming out of the major globalist institutions, like the Club of Rome, which says, the earth has a cancer and the cancer is man. I taught human ecology at Cal State University for 22 years, so I'm well familiar with their environmental logic. Oh, yes, we have too many people. In order to save the earth, we have to get rid of all these excess people. This is how the elite thinks, not really because they're environmentalists, but because they don't want to share. So they've always had this kind of Malthusian attitude that, we've got to get rid of the masses. It really comes back down to George Orwell's 1984, where the high class, the upper class, wants to cement themselves in power and destroy the middle class. And we've seen that incrementally going on for many decades, especially since Reagan was elected in 1980. And then you'll have a two-class system with the high class fairly small. 6,000 people now supposedly own about half the wealth of the world. And then you'll have whoever's left after they get finished, genociding the rest of us would be their slaves and could well be robotized. They're into the transhumanist agenda as well. They're also into immortality for themselves with, chipping themselves with massive knowledge and giving themselves bionics so they live forever. I mean, these people are really crazy, in my opinion. But of course, they have, this is a consistent goal. This goes back many generations. So the elite is actually studyable. In fact, A.K. Chesterton has said the proper study of political man is elites. We need to know these people's names. And of course, one such is G. Edward Griffin, who's written the book about the creature at Jekyll Island, the 1913 Federal Reserve Act. And, he's been on many interviews, and he said the problem with America is the people who lead this country are determined to destroy it. And that has certainly been true since 1913. So we have, this is a counter-revolutionary movement from the top down. This is the elite taking away the resources from the middle class and the rest of the world. I think this is very demonstrable. I've certainly, I've reached the point with my websites, Richie, where I've come full circle. So I believe I understand how these various things fit together. 9/11, this weather warfare, the gang stalking, etc. These are all using these very, very high tech Tesla technologies and mind control to a large extent, and certainly weather warfare. All of these things are being deployed, as well as standard, warfare in the Middle East, etc.
I'm just going to remind our listeners, we've got Dr. Eric T. Karlstrom live on the line from California today. Eric can be found at a couple of different websites, but start off with 911nwo.com. If you Google gang stalking, mind control cults, you'll find Eric as well. I'll tweet out links to those. I've been fascinated by Eric since I met him because of where he's worked. Eric has been an establishment guy, it's fair to say, and that's not in any way to insult Eric as a professor of geography at California State University. And it's very interesting when people come from that world and they talk about these things. And we've been talking about directed energy weapon technology and why Eric believes that it is being deployed, not just in California, but elsewhere, for reasons to depopulate areas, to render areas uninhabitable, to push people towards super cities, smart cities, as Eric has talked a lot about as well, and how that segues into different agendas. I think of you a lot, Eric. You've not been on for ages, but I do, as a content creator, as a producer, I have a contact book and I'm looking through it regularly, and I often think of you. And recently, of course, a number of organisations around the world, a number of health organisations have begun to admit that fertility levels or fertility rates are down all over the world. Sperm counts are down all over the world, that we're not having as many children, we won't have as many children in the future, and that the population will decline. And it staggers me that at the same time they're saying this, they're also saying we've got a big problem with overpopulation. And I think of you and the research that you've been doing and the work that you're doing, and I think, something is very wrong here. Something stinks here. Fertility is down, and you'll tell me, no doubt, that fertility is down for a number of reasons, environmental reasons like food and water, but also because of our exposure to the technologies that you write about. I'm right in saying that, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are conspiracies. I mean, these are plans to reduce the population. And, I taught human ecology, like I said, for some 20 years. And, the argument goes something like this, the Earth only has a certain carrying capacity for humans. And, maybe, the UN conference would say that's 1 billion. So we've got to get rid of 6 billion odd now. But other estimates say, hey, the carrying capacity of the Earth for humans is 30 billion. So we have reasonable estimates that are all over the map on that. Nobody knows for sure. And it depends on how we live. But the fact is that our leaders are, psychopaths and eugenicists, and they don't want to share. And so they will use whatever intellectual argument that they can, and they will prostitute any and all scientists and social scientists to advance their agenda, because they're the ones who print the money, out of nothing. And so we have this, we have this system which is driven by this fiat currency system. And everybody is scrambling to make ends meet and scrambling to make a living, and they will get in line usually, or often enough, with the powers that be. Yeah, let me just give you a couple of references that would give people somewhere else to look other than just my own websites. Ilana Freeland's books, Under an Ionized Sky, From Chemtrails to Space Fence Lockdown, 2018. Her 2014 book, Chemtrails, HARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. She also did a series called Sub Rosa America, and some of these are like on sale for $900 from Amazon. Well, that gives you a clue that they don't want that out there.
Is that right? Is that right, Eric? Is that right? Yeah. They put the prices. Is that right? Wow. So they put the prices up to such a level that it's basically it's untenable for people to buy it. Wow. I'm shocked.
Yeah, they just don't want that information out there. This is how they do it. It's the economic strategy. John Whitehead is a constitutional lawyer. He wrote a book called Battlefield America, The War Against the American People, 2013. He also wrote A Government of Wolves, The Emerging American Police State, that same year. Tom DeWeese wrote The Wrenching Transformation of America, Agenda 21 in 2016. And then Sustainable, The War on Free Enterprise, Private Property, and Individuals, 2018. And then Bernard Harcourt's The Counter-Revolution, How Our Government Went to War Against Its Own Citizens. This is, I'm afraid, the reality. We're fighting now our governments, the governments that are supposed to serve us, the individuals who supposedly took an oath to serve the U.S. Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, and to protect the American people. This is now a government of wolves.
Let me put
the
something.
NSA, the CIA, the FBI. These are the people. The Air Force. These are the people conducting these operations.
I want to throw something into the mix, and I think it's important for my listeners to understand this. I've worked in commercial and national media for years. I've also taught radio production to a very good standard. I've worked for City and Guilds, and I've worked for city colleges, teaching people how to produce content. It's something it's the only thing I was ever really any good at. Now, I want to say something about Eric Karlstrom and Ilana Freeland and the constitutional lawyer that Eric mentioned a minute ago. Listen up now, folks. This is very important. If Eric Karlstrom was a madman, if he was full of shit, and if this was a nonsense, I guarantee you that commercial media in the United States would be all too quick to have him on. They'd love to have him on. If it was a nonsense, if this was complete crap, they would have him on. They would have Ilana Freeland on. They would have some of the other researchers that come on this program. They would have them on. If there was no merit to what Eric was saying, they would be happy to bring him on. it would be car crash TV, it would be daytime television, they would bring him on. There is a reason why the networks don't bring people like Eric Karlstrom and Alana Freeland and others on anymore. There is a reason. Sure, they could bring Eric on and shout him down and do a 6-minute interview, shout at him, call him a crazy guy and all that. But the problem with that is Eric is not a crazy guy. He's pretty mild-mannered. He's very articulate. People would then begin to look and begin to explore, well, why, who is this guy that says that they want to depopulate parts of the country and move us all into super cities? I've been making programs for years. There used to be a time when people like Eric, even if they thought he was crazy, they would bring him on. Now they don't. There's a reason why they don't. Sorry, I just wanted to say that, Eric. It's very important, because I get listeners saying, this is crazy. Why do you do this? Why do you bring guys like that on? There's a reason, because it's credible stuff, this. Whether you like it or not, this is credible. And there's an enormous amount of information on Eric's website and on others to support this. Eric, you get what I'm saying, right? If you were a crackpot, they would have you on in a heartbeat.
Yeah, well, your point is well taken, and thank you. But let me read just a couple sentences from Preston James, PhD, a former veteran and a writer for Veterans Today. He wrote this article I mentioned, You Are the Enemy, 2014. Here's what he says. There is now a new American war. It is inside America. It is called the War on Terror. The enemy is you. It is a staged, phony war that has been created by the International Zionist Crime Syndicate, IZCS. This new war on terror has an enemy. That enemy is the American people, you and me. This new war on terror has been socially engineered to provide a continual stream of degradations and provocations against the average American, such as what's going on in California in a dramatic manner, provoking many in a never-ending stream to resist and causing them to be labeled dissenters. Once they have been labeled dissenters, they are put on a Department of Homeland Security, DHS, Main Core terror watch list, which top insiders know is a targeted assassination list for later eradication of all freedom-loving Americans who want to restore the American constitutional republic. At present, the Main Core list has over 10 million Americans on it, and it is growing every day with thousands of new additions. Well, believe me, I'm on this list. I've been targeted now at least, well, I know since 2013, but probably going back before that. We can talk about that sometime if you like. Yeah. Get a ticket for driving offense or any arrest, even if later proven innocent, and it is highly likely you will be placed on this Main Core terror watch and assassination list. Over time, these provocations are designed to result in a continuing stream of American dissenters that want to take their republic back from the Zionist hijackers and will meet DHS tyranny and force with the like. Any and all dissenters are now being defined as enemies of the state. So now you get the picture. I mean, these are provocations, pushing. And then if anybody stands up and says, wait a minute, stop killing me and my friends and family and my neighbors, then they're put on the list. You see how odious and diabolical this system is.
Do you know, listening to that, my mind is drawn to InfoWars years ago when Alex did some really good stuff, before InfoWars became massive, this global phenomenon that it is. And he would talk about stuff like this and interview people like you and get into it and lay it out for people to take it or leave it. Now, of course, it's massive and it just deals in identity politics and geopolitics and domestic politics and doesn't deal with any of this stuff anymore. And, I'm fascinated by that and, would like to know why that is. And that's what happens, you see. That's what happens. I believe that this agenda you've described is genuine. I didn't come to that conclusion easily. It wasn't easy to come to terms with accepting that there's a lot of merit to what you're saying. And I think that the establishment, the system behind it will do anything that it can, Eric, to prevent the wider public ever getting any, sense of it or learning anything about it. That's where we are now. And I feel you don't want my pity. You don't need my pity. I feel sorry for people like you. Because it's a mountain 10 times the size of Everest that you need to climb, Eric, to get this information to more and more and more people. Because I think presented credibly, presented properly to people, I think it will give people a moment of pause and will make them think but it's just so difficult to get it out to people.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, too. I do believe we're fighting for the survival of humanity as we know it. I really do. I think the transhumanist agenda is locked up in this with the smart cities and Agenda 21. And we're really looking at a 1984 kind of scenario where they put the population into a total tyranny, feudalistic state. This is not the kind of world that, I want to sign up for. Certainly not the world I grew up in. I thought I grew up in the 50s and 60s. And so what we've had is this massive betrayal of the populace by our leaders, who I think have been hijacked, as Preston James says. Here's what Governor Jerry Brown of California said at a press conference, and I think it's very telling. He said, "This is not the new normal," he's referring to the fires. "This is the new abnormal. And this new abnormal will continue certainly in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And unfortunately, the best science is telling us that dryness, warmth, drought, and all those things, they're going to intensify." Well, how in the world would he know that? He also said at the Campfire press conference that climate change, and of course this is the UN agenda central issue that drives the whole thing, climate change threatens, quote, "our way of life." So Jerry Brown is very much on board. He's going to read the lines that he's given, which is, of course, why he's in office, just like I'm afraid Donald Trump as well. And he's saying that the best science is telling us that we're going to see these kind of draconian beast fires for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. He wouldn't know that unless these things were prescripted and he was told what to say. But I think that is the reality. They are prescripted and he is being told what to say.
Unbelievable, isn't it? And you have a situation. Speaking to, I did a live stream earlier today, and I might have mentioned it, maybe I didn't, but in today's monologue, I did a story today. The Times of London, would you believe, Eric, and the Telegraph, which is another national broadsheet newspaper here in the UK, they've been running stories lately about California and about Silicon Valley and about how the executives of the tech companies and the software engineers for the tech companies are going to extraordinary lengths to make sure that their children are not exposed to their inventions. You might be aware of this. You probably are. And I was reading it over the weekend. I was going to talk about it last night, but I wasn't on air, and I couldn't believe it. You know, the barefaced cheek of it. They're designing these phones and tablets and computers and social media outlets like Facebook and Instagram, and they're putting the software into the phones, but they're making sure their own kids, their own offspring, are not exposed to it because they know what it's doing to us, Eric. It's just unbelievable, isn't it? It's out there. It
is, and yeah.
Go ahead.
And we're being herded into a world that's ruled by artificial intelligence that these people are backing, people like Elon Musk, and his neural networks and all these kinds of things. These are the future is now, I'm afraid. We're talking about brain-to-brain interface and brain-to-computer interface and all kinds of things. They want to robotize the human species into a slave species for themselves. And the sooner we can, blow the whistle on this, say no, thank you. We would rather have our free will. We would rather have our lives back. The better chance we have, I think, of preserving our freedoms. But they want to tie us up. This is from an article going back to our subject, Laser Beams, California Fires, and the History of Environmental Weapons, is a quote, highly qualified California fire captain, John Lord, concluded, directed energy weapons do as the only plausible explanation for the catastrophic fires. In this interview, Mr. Lord references the 16 major fires in 2017 that began in the middle of the night in Napa, Sonoma, and Mendocino counties. And he says this is Agenda 21 or the new improved Agenda 30, a UN plan to drive people into the smart cities and off the land.
Here's a question, Eric. Sorry to interrupt. Here's the question. There are a lot of people in the world that not practice, but they're big into astronomy. I should say astrology, shouldn't I? And they've got their own telescopes and stuff like that. And telescopes have become more and more powerful. Can people see any of this stuff? Is any of this stuff visible? I don't want to be silly about this now, but it just occurred to me. If stuff is being deployed in space, is it visible through telescopic equipment, do you think, or is that possible?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. Let's talk a little bit about some of the evidence on the ground that you can see if you go through these websites with all the photos. You can see photos that actually show the laser beams going through a smoky field or whatever, or seem to. These lasers could be directed from space, from airplanes, from a mobile platform, etc. You can see homes that are cut in two, like a knife cut it in two, and of course a normal fire won't do that. You can see a baseball field in California at the Cardinal Newman High School where one half is absolutely scorched and black from the Tubbs fire. The other half is still pristine and green.
Yeah.
This is not what normal fires do. We can see houses and buildings completely disintegrated down to the level of the ground, just like the World Trade Centers were. By the way, the World Trade Center also had big vertical holes punched in some of the buildings, again, coming from space-based weaponry, I believe, laser weapons. In these homes, glass windows, porcelain bathtubs, appliances, granite countertops, toilets, textile stonework are completely gone. They're vanished. By the way, this is what the death ray did always back in 1942 when Tesla invented it. He said this thing will disintegrate an airplane engine from 250 miles away. An engine block, big engine blocks, made of iron and that sort of thing. These things are just, turned into, they disappeared. Likewise, we see local trees, shrubs left standing in green and grass is green while you get these absolutely destroyed homes. And next to the absolutely destroyed home, there's another home which is pristine and in perfect shape. So these are highly selective fires. We hear stories of victims trying to drive away in their cars. They're burned alive as they're fleeing. Meanwhile, the U.S. Forest Service, which has signed onto Agenda 21, is not allowing these already ready and equipped air supertankers to drop retardant, the fire retardant on the fires that could and would put them out rapidly. And you don't see red fire retardant anywhere. Meanwhile, FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, private multinationals descend into the areas very quickly, just like we saw at 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Harvey, and Agenda 21 rules take over, and the people are now the enemy. And now the term is yo-yo, you're on your own. There are no explanation as to how, say, 60 fires could start overnight in a day in October 2017. There's no explanation as to how they started. Each of these would have burned somewhere upwards of 50,000 acres each. In 2018, and now we're just the basic data here, 2018, about 75,000 acres burned, 1.7 million acres as of November 11th have burned, and the most of any fire season in history. And now the fire season is year-round. Now, California has a Mediterranean climate, and it rains basically from November till April normally, but we've had a drought probably caused by the chemtrailing, the aerial spraying over, the last couple decades. As I said, insurance does not cover a lot of these losses. Most of these losses are not covered, so people are having a very difficult time getting back into their homes. No investigations are being conducted. So this does seem to be part of the fulfilling the UN Agenda 21 Biodiversity Treaty, which is, to make real the Agenda 21 map of death, which puts 50% of America off limits to human activity. There is a plan for biodiversity written down, 2011 to 2020, and then another plan for post-2020. These documents can be examined.
Yeah, it's all true. It's all true, yeah. Yeah, it is. Again, I've got to endorse that, lest people think, why am I not jumping all over you and challenging you? I can't, because it's true. The tragedy, of course, is these simple questions that you've asked about these 60 fires, coming all together over one night. And again, we're back again to our media, the media that we are left with, not asking these basic questions. These are simple questions that any half-assed reporter should be asking when they're meeting with environmental experts at these press conferences or rangers or whatever. These are simple questions, Eric, right? How is it possible? And yet nobody asks them. Nobody says, how is it possible?
The controlled mainstream media. And, Deborah Tavares, who is a tireless freedom fighter, I would say, in Northern California, predicted these directed energy weapons Agenda 21 fire 7 years ago. And she's done, she's been talking about these things for a long, long time. She's more or less, one of the points she brings up is that the weather news at all of the stations is a corporation itself owned by the Rothschild family, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So, meanwhile, more evidence, people see and photograph blue lights in the sky, which look a lot like the aurora borealis, the northern lights, which indicates a highly ionized atmosphere, which you get from the spraying of the chemtrails, the aluminum, barium, strontium oxides, which essentially ionizes the sky and makes it more conductive when you zap it with electromagnetic frequencies. So what we have is zapping and spraying by the Air Force to control the weather. And I've done interviews, Richie, about, how Hurricane Harvey was controlled. And Hurricane Michael was created by the technologies that we have. I mean, Hurricane Harvey made landfall and then was bounced right back out to sea, by probably HARP-like radar weapons. That doesn't happen in nature. In fact, it bounced out to sea twice to refuel. I mean, what we're seeing is a post-natural world. We're seeing a world which is man-controlled. And many people, credible people, I've heard say they believe all our weather now is man-controlled. I'm not sure about that, but I think a lot of it is controlled for military purposes. When you have this, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because we're going to run out of time in about 90 seconds. There are one or two well-known meteorologists beginning to ask questions. One of them is of course, amazingly, the brother of Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition party, the Labour Party here in the UK. Piers Corbyn is going around the country with a researcher called Mark Windows, and they're talking to people about these very things. And Piers is a credible researcher, so people are asking these questions. I'm absolutely wide open to the possibilities that you've laid out in your research, Eric, as to why these things are happening. I know that much of the technology is old, it's not new, and you do that very well, actually. It's to your credit that you talk to people about how this technology, how some of it anyway, has been around for many years, and the ability to accelerate an existing storm, a natural storm. I mean, we talked about this a couple of years ago, you and I, and it was brilliant to hear that, and it's absolutely right. You make a compelling case that something is very wrong here. I'm going to obviously give you the final word. I do mention 911nwo.com as a starting point to understand what Eric is talking about. Eric is a emeritus professor of geography, California State. Dr. Eric T. Karlstrom, you've been listening to him on Tuesday's show. About 60 seconds left, Eric. They are yours, my friend. Over to you.
Okay, well, Richie, thank you very much for having me. You're a courageous man to even talk about these things. And of course, there's a lot of suffering going on in the world as a result of these programs. I think if people start to wake up and learn how to defend themselves against these programs, against, maybe our government has been captured by a secret government, which is comprised of, we can talk about who's behind it, etc. But wake up. We have every incentive to want to wake up now. And again, my websites are an attempt to educate people. These are vast digital libraries of information that I put together. 911nwo.com, gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com, naturalclimatechange.org. And I believe, Richie, that this information is now coming together so that it is coherent. It makes sense. Again, you look at the secret history of weather warfare and the secret history of mind control since World War II, then it's possible to understand what is going down right now around the world. And I think the people need to stand up, wake up, and take back our nations and our countries to protect ourselves and our neighbors and our families and our future.
Eric, do me a favour. It's been too long since you were on. Very early in the new year. Let's get you back on. Let's talk about who and what is behind it. And, I'm very interested in that as well. I know we dabbled in that before. Thanks for coming on. Keep asking the questions, Eric, and putting the information out there. Really glad to have you back on today. It's very difficult and it's a very depressing subject in many, in many ways it's very depressing, but it's vital that people get to hear about it and get to consider the information. Thanks for coming on, mate. Really appreciate your time. I know you're busy. Thanks again, Eric.
Thank you, Richie. Okay, look forward to it next time.
Thanks for that. Eric T. Karlstrom, live on the Richie Allen Show this Tuesday. That's it for the programme. We're right up on time. Go to, it's 911NWO.com as a starting point, 911NWO.com. And as he said, there's a tranche of documents there, information, photographs, which lend a lot of credibility to what he's been telling you and me in the last 45 minutes. Thanks again to Dr. Paul Craig Roberts for his very interesting observations on Brexit and on Jewish influence in American politics and more, and Julian Assange, of course, as well. Going to love you and leave you back again tomorrow, Wednesday at 5 p.m. UK time. And I will have 2 more very interesting guests for you as well. All right. Thanks for listening. Look after yourselves and one another. Bye. See you tomorrow. Bye.